Well, welcome back to your weekly dose of theology, or Theology Thursdays, as I like to call them. The picture that you saw there in the intro, that was a picture of me with my family. We've been away on vacation for 2 weeks. We went up to Colorado Springs, and that picture was taken there at a place that they refer to as the Garden of the Gods, which my family and I we didn't call it that. We didn't call it that. We referred to it as the Garden of our Lord, which is accurate and fitting because it belongs to our Creator, not to the pagans. And so we had just some really great time over the past couple weeks, and we've been away from videos, been away from preaching and sermons and stuff, but it was a good time of refreshment. We got some hiking in and some running. Took Kyle fishing up on Pikes Peak at the reservoirs there. We got to go to an Irish pub. It was just a really great time, a time of refreshment for us, and we were just really grateful to the Lord and the congregation, the Ridge, for letting us do that. But we're getting back into kind of the groove of things here, the Theology Thursdays. And so this week, the question is a really good one. It's probably one of the most common questions that I heard when I was in the Marine Corps. And so many of you know that I was in the Marine Corps for about 8 years. And really, that was a season of my life as a Christian where I really had an opportunity to evangelize to a lot of people. And I got to come in contact with people of all different backgrounds, people who were atheists, agnostics, people who were in all different kinds of religions. And so it was a really diverse and pluralistic group of people. And one of the most common questions that I ran into was this question right here that we're tackling today. Since there is so much evil in the world, how can God exist? Or we could unpack it a different way. And that question comes in various forms. Since there's so much injustice in the world, since there is so much inequity, there's racism, there's children being abused, there's atrocities, right? There's rape and murder. There's all of these bad things that humans do to each other. All of these things exist. We know that. Therefore, how can God possibly exist? And so that's the question that we're going to be tackling today. And this is really just really an introduction to the topic. This is in theological circles and philosophical circles, they refer to this as the problem of evil. The problem of evil. And so that's what theologians refer to it. So really this is just an introduction to the topic. And I think it's a really important one. It's a really good one. And it's one, if you're a Christian, you've probably heard this from friends or family members maybe who they don't refer to themselves as religious and they don't believe in God. And one of the things maybe they say is, well, look at all the evil in the world. How can there be a God? Since there's so much evil in the world, which is a great question. It's a fair question. It's a good question. And I would like to give it 3 responses in this particular video. Obviously, much more could be said. Entire books and doctoral theses have been written on this topic. But we're going to try to just maybe just kind of whet our palate here a little bit with this. And at some point in the future, it's my hope and my intent to circle back to this topic. Because people and some of you might be aware of names like Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson, who are kind of very prominent on YouTube and kind of gaining some notoriety in the world, and they have attempted to answer this question. And I think in part one of the reasons why Sam Harris, who's an atheist, an outspoken atheist, and a deep thinker, right, a critical thinker, is trying to construct a moralism based on atheistic evolutionary process. And Jordan Peterson does the same thing. I think Jordan Peterson does a much better job than Sam Harris. But I still think that their philosophy and their underlining, the way that they go about it, I think it's flawed. And so I think later on in a video at some point I'll go and I'll address that. But I want to just cover 3 points here with you just to lay a foundation to kind of maybe prepare you for that video that will come later on. So 3 responses to the question, since there is so much evil in the world, how can there be a God? How can God exist? And so when I'm faced with this question, and maybe this is a good way for you to think about it, is that I'm kind of sharing with you how I go about answering that question to someone. I recognize most of the people watching these videos are Christians, they're members of the church, and so maybe this is a video to help equip you, walk through and navigate that question. And hopefully this will be edifying for you as well. So the first thing I do is I really ask questions. When I'm in a conversation with somebody, I don't try to debate them. I don't try to get argumentative with them. What I do is I try to ask them questions in a genuine way, not in a way that's setting a trap, not in a way that's disingenuous, but just hey, help me understand where you're coming from. And so the first question I ask them is this. I start with the word evil. And so I say, why do you call things evil? If there is no God, help me understand where you're coming from when you say that there's injustice, there's inequity, when there's evil in the world, things aren't fair. Why do you believe in those things? Help me understand with some evidence where you're coming from. Why do you think those things exist? If we're just animals, if that's all I am, if I'm just a highly evolved primate, a highly evolved mammal, why is it, if Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, the survival of the fittest, the origin of species, if that is true, if I'm operating in that worldview, that the strong survive, might makes right, why is it that you feel that there's injustice if a strong person takes advantage of a weaker person? Help me understand why you, in your worldview, your understanding, why if an adult takes advantage of a child, why is that wrong? Or if one adult takes advantage of an elderly person, why is that wrong in your theory? Help me understand that. Because when I look out at the animal kingdom and the animal world, it's not, most humans would recognize that we would not call it injustice or murder when a cheetah is chasing down a gazelle, right, and kills it and eats it. That's just, we look at that and say, well, that's just survival of the fittest. That's just survival. That's just the way of the world. This is a dog-eat-dog world. So help me understand why you think there is something out there called injustice, or why you think inequity and evil is wrong. Help me understand why there is a right and a wrong. So really where I'm trying to lead that conversation is to get them to realize that if there is no God, then there is no such thing as evil. There is no such thing as right versus wrong. There is no such thing as a moral, absolute, transcendent truth. All of it then boils down to, and this is where I could go off into responding to Jordan Peterson, but I won't. For this video, I'll kind of kick that can down the road a little bit. But really where I'm trying to lead them is to demonstrate that if there is no God, then all morals are relative. They're relative to the individual, they're relative to the particular culture, they're relative to the particular nation or village or time of history, of human history. And so morals just become relative. And so what you think rape is wrong now, who are you to say that maybe thousands of years ago it wasn't? If you think slavery is wrong, that's an absolute moral evil, slavery is always wrong, well, why do you say that? If you don't believe that humans are anything more than highly evolved animals, then help me understand that. And so really what I'm trying to do in that question is I'm trying to throw it back, turn it on its head and say, you tell me why there's evil in the world. I was, years ago, I think it was 2006, I was at Moody Bible Institute, and a friend of mine was finishing up his doctorate work at Purdue University, and he was arguing, his doctoral thesis was on intelligent design theory. And for his last thing before he could graduate, he had to debate on Darwin Day at Purdue University somebody from the biology department. And so they got into this, it was a good debate, very respectful. And then towards the end of the debate, the moderator took questions from the audience. And one of the young ladies that was a Purdue student, she was there, and she asked a question. And I couldn't believe that the moderator floored it, because it was like one of these questions that just really set up the biology professor, kind of painted her into a corner almost, from where the conversation had led. And the question was this: if we are nothing more than highly evolved animals, then is rape wrong? And I never forget, you could feel the tension right, because of the question, you could feel the tension in the auditorium. And the professor from Purdue, she walked forward from the biology department, she said, well, we have to understand that rape is nothing more than one organism trying to pass on its genetic information to another organism. From an evolutionary point of view, that's what it is. There was an audible gasp in the auditorium. People were shocked. And I remember my friend from Moody, he sat back and he just kind of let her go, because he recognized that was really the greatest point for him of his argument, demonstrating that, listen, if atheistic evolutionary theory is what is true, then the consequences of those ideas is exactly what that biology professor said. Now, I think her response is an abomination. I think she's absolutely wrong. Rape is categorically wrong. It is an evil. But what I what I appreciated about her response was that it was intellectually consistent with her position. And rarely do you get atheists to do that. Usually what atheists want to do is they want to say that we're nothing more than animals, but at the same time, they'll talk about injustice and inequity and fairness and how slavery is wrong and how this is wrong and that's wrong. And they're often sometimes the most, I would say, have all of this doctrine. They have all of this belief and doctrine inside of them, but at the same time, they don't want to believe in the existence of God. They don't want to believe in some kind of higher, moral, absolute, transcendent truth. And so if we presuppose Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest, then how do we come about with something called evil? And really where the person is left, including Jordan Peterson, is really just a pragmatic argument. Pragmatic. So that's the first way I respond, is by trying to turn the question on and say, wait, help me understand why you think that there's something called injustice or inequity or evil in the world. That's how my second response is that what or who determines what is right or wrong? Because usually the conversation will progress and they'll say, well, it's wrong because the government says it's wrong. Human law tells us what's right and what's wrong. These things are wrong. You can't just break into somebody's house, Jeremiah, because we have laws against that. Like, okay, so let's go with that for a moment. If we're going to say that it's human laws and human government that tells us what's right and wrong, then is slavery wrong in the 1700s and the 1800s? Human governments had permitted slavery for centuries, for thousands of years. The abolition of slavery is actually something new. Is that person then willing to make the stand that slavery wasn't wrong during the 17 and 1800s? Thinking about American slavery. And most would say, well, no, that's wrong. Well, isn't that the point? Isn't the point that oftentimes human governments and human laws get it wrong? They don't get it right. And so what becomes the standard of morality? And then usually what they'll do is then they'll circle back around, well, the individual, which is a common phrase today, is you do you. Speak your truth. You do you. You determine what's right and what's wrong for you. And then they'll add this little caveat at the end, which I just love, which is, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. It's the golden rule. And then then my response to that is, well, where do you get this idea of a golden rule from? It's actually from Scripture. It's actually from Christian scriptures. But that's besides the point. But what they want to do is say, well, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. And then to which my response is but wait a minute. What happens if my truth says it doesn't matter if I hurt somebody else? What happens is, there's nothing in Darwinian evolution, there's nothing in evolutionary theory that says that the cheetah can chase down the gazelle as long as he doesn't hurt the gazelle. There's nothing, right? There's nothing in evolutionary theory. If we're nothing more than mammals, it's survival of the fittest. There's nothing built into that that tells us that I should respect somebody else, apart from some kind of pragmatic argument that, well, that's just the best way to get along and survive. Well, okay, fair enough. Just because it happens to work is perhaps the best reason that they can come up with. And again, I'm going to save that response for another video. And then the third response. So the first response is, I start with the word evil. Why do you call things evil? Second question that I ask is, what or who then determines what's right or wrong? What's truth? The third reason, or the third response that I give to this, is the reason you feel intuitively that there is something just wrong with the world, right? That you feel, and most people do, that things are not right. The reason why you look out into the world and you see things that bother you, you see injustice, you see things that are not fair, you see evil, you see things that are wrong, and those things bother you. I guess the last response I give to that is, why do you think that bothers you? As a Christian, and what the Christian scriptures tell me is that the reason why that bothers us is because you and I were created in the image of God. That you are more than just a highly evolved primate. You're more than just an animal. You are created in the image of God. Although broken, although fallen, yes, but there is a sense of morality in you that remains, and you can sense and you can see things out in the world that are not right. And the reason why we look out in the world and we say things are not the way that they're supposed to be, to me, is not evidence that there is no God and that therefore I'm just an animal. Rather, it's evidence to the contrary. It's evidence that I am more than just an animal. There is a God. There is something out there that is higher than me and tells me that when a child is being taken advantage of, an elderly person is taken advantage of, that rape is wrong, it's evil, murder is evil, theft is evil. And when I look out in these things, to me, that is proof, it is confirmation that humans are more than just animals on the African plain, survival of the fittest. So those are just a few responses that I would give to a person who is asking the question, since there's so much evil in the world, how can God exist? I back them up and I say, well, let's talk about that word first before we go further. Help me understand why you think there's something called evil. Why do you believe in something called justice, fairness, equity? Why is it that you believe in those things? And where do you ground it? Is it just in you because of your feelings, you as an individual, human government, culture? What or who determines what is wrong? And then lastly, I point them to the fact that the reason why they're bothered, the reason why they mourn and they say this isn't right, is because they are created in the image of God. And there is more to them than just being an animal. Well, I hope this video finds you well. I love you. God loves you. Take care and have a great week.